Rain hammered the windows of the funeral home, drawing long, gray streaks that blurred the world outside. I sat in the last row and watched my father's casket sink behind flowers I could never afford. Three people had come to say goodbye. Three for a man who once owned half the most fertile land in the county. In the front row sat Margaret, his second wife, with a silk handkerchief lifted to eyes that did not smear. Beside her was Derek, her son, leaning close to whisper words that made her nod with careful grace. They looked like they belonged there in expensive black, and I felt like an imposter in a thrift store dress. I had not spoken to my father in 3 years, not since the last fight about the farm. He chose the new family, I chose my pride. I told myself I did not regret it yet as the pastor spoke words about generosity and love. My chest tightened in that old familiar way. I kept thinking there might be one last sign, one quiet proof that I had not been cut out of his life as cleanly as an old fence line pulled from the earth. After the service, Margaret approached with Derek drifting a step behind her, the way a shadow follows a wall. I heard the practiced sentence, "I am sorry for your loss," and nodded, because there was nothing to say that would not break. Derek added that the arrangements would be explained soon, his tone soft but shaped like a verdict. I wanted to ask what my father had said about me in his last days, but my voice stayed where it was safest, somewhere behind my ribs. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Patterson and Associates, a room of dark wood and pale light, where the air smelled like paper and polish. Margaret and Derek took the chairs closest to the desk. I sat across from them with my hands in my lap, cold and empty. Patterson adjusted his glasses and opened a folder. "Thank you for coming," he said, and began to read. The last will and testament of Robert James Mitchell, dated March 15th of this year. My heart stumbled. March 15th was my birthday. To my beloved wife, Margaret, he leaves the house on Elm Street, all furnishings and his savings accounts. To his stepson, Derek, he leaves his truck and his gun collection. My palms grew damp. To my daughter, Michelle, he leaves his old toolbox from the garage. Silence fell in the room like a sheet of glass. A toolbox. 27 years of being his daughter, and I received something red and dented that smelled like oil and rust. Margaret exhaled as if a weight had slid from her shoulders. Derek gave a tight little smile, the kind men give when a bet pays out. I carried the toolbox to my apartment and put it on the floor by the window. It was heavier than it looked, the paint scratched to bare metal along the edges. I set my fingers on the latch and then let them fall away. For hours, I walked around the box as if it might speak first. When I finally lifted the lid, the smell rose up and brought a spill of memories with it. Those small evenings when I was a girl, and my father showed me how to turn a screw straight, how to keep a blade sharp, how to put a tool back cleaner than I found it. I sorted past the hammer and the pliers and the long-handled screwdriver worn smooth by his grip. At the bottom, wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, lay a small digital recorder with a strip of tape on it. In his careful hand, it said for Michelle. My breath caught. I pressed play. "Michelle," he said, and the sound of his voice cracked something in me that had been set hard for years. "If you're hearing this, I am gone, and you probably think I forgot you." I paused the recording because my eyes were wet and the room had shifted on its hinges. I pressed play again. "Things are not what they seem. Margaret does not know about this recording. I have been protecting you, even when it meant you hated me for it. Protecting me from what I whispered," and his voice kept going on its own steady rails. "5 years ago when I married Margaret, you thought it was about loneliness, but she was drowning in medical debt. They needed help, and I needed to make sure you were taken care of without them knowing it. I never sold the farm, Michelle. I moved it into a trust. It has been running on its own and waiting for you." I stopped the recording again and pressed my fingers to my mouth. The farm, our land, still ours. He spoke about hiding the truth so that Margaret could get what she needed without drawing the wrong eyes. He said there was a false bottom in the toolbox. Inside it, I would find a brass key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank number 247. Mrs. Henderson would be expecting me. There would be trust papers and the deed and a letter that explained the rest. My hands were shaking while I searched the seams of the box. The false bottom slid loose with a little scrape. The key lay inside, small and cold, as if it had been waiting in the dark to find my palm. I pressed play again. His voice lowered. "I was protecting you from a man named Vincent Torres. he said, Derek's father. He was released from prison 6 months before I married Margaret. He made threats. He wanted any money Margaret might touch. If he learns about you and the farm, he will use you to get it. The recorder clicked off. The room went still. I sat on the floor and felt the old anger drain out of me, replaced by something more complicated. My father had cut me off, not because I meant nothing, but because I meant too much in a world that could turn love into leverage. I wiped my cheeks, slid the key into my pocket, and told myself I would not waste another day on pride. The next morning I called in sick and drove to First National Bank. Mrs. Henderson had kind eyes and a way of speaking that made the air calm. She led me to a small room and set the box on the table. Inside were trust documents, the deed and a letter addressed to me in my father's hand. The letter filled in what the recorder could not. He wrote about Torres, about threats, about why it had been safer to let the town believe he had sold everything to pay bills. He wrote about me, about how he had watched from a distance, about how he wanted me to have the farm when it could be mine without becoming a weapon in someone else's hands. I folded the letter and set it back in the box with care. When I stepped out into the cool light of the bank lobby, the day seemed brighter and harder at once. I had the truth now. It was heavier than a lie and it fit my hands better. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table with the recorder beside the toolbox. I pressed play one more time and listened to his voice run to its end and stop. I thought I understood what it cost to protect someone, but I had been wrong. Protection is a kind of love that often looks like absence. It is a closed door, a cold room, a silence that carries a promise. I placed my palm on the red lid and let the metal cool under my skin. The farm was waiting. And so I realized was the danger my father had kept away by standing between me and the worst of the world. The night after I read the letter, I could not sleep. I kept hearing my father's voice in the still air of my apartment, steady and tired, telling me about Vincent Torres. I imagined the man, hard eyes and heavier hands, a shadow at the edge of every memory. My chest ached with a strange mix of grief and fear, and for the first time since the funeral, I wished I had someone to share it with. But there was only me, the red toolbox, and the recorder that had become both a comfort and a curse. The next morning, I brewed weak coffee and stared at the trust documents. The numbers were clear. The farm was not just alive. It was thriving under the management of Green Valley. The value had grown beyond what it was in my father's time. I traced my finger along the deed and whispered ours. But the whisper trembled. The farm was not a simple inheritance. It was a promise wrapped in danger. I tried to go to work that day, but I barely made it through half my shift at the hardware store. Customers' voices blurred, and every clink of tools reminded me of the box waiting at home. By evening, I returned to my apartment exhausted. When the knock came at the door, I jumped. Derek stood there, his collar damp with sweat despite the cool air. He looked older than he had at the funeral, as if something had been gnawing at him. "We need to talk," he said. I hesitated, hiding the documents under a pile of laundry before letting him in. His eyes darted around the room, restless. He told me about Torres, about how the man had found Margaret in the grocery store, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, demanded money. Derek spoke quickly, his words spilling like water through a crack. "Vincent thinks there is money hidden," he said. I thought maybe there was, so I told him about some deposits I saw in Mom's papers. I thought if it was true, I could pay him off. My heart raced. I realized he was closer to the truth than he knew. Closer to the trust, to the farm, to everything my father had tried to keep hidden. I had a choice. I could lie, keep the secret, or I could tell Derek the truth and risk everything. I thought of Margaret, of her bruises, of the way she had sat alone at the funeral, her grief hidden behind perfect posture. So I told him. I told Derek about the recording, about the trust, about the farm. Every word felt like a stone lifted from my chest and placed in his hands. I waited for anger, for envy, for the sneer he had worn in the lawyer's office. Instead, his shoulders dropped. Relief softened his face. "So Robert really was protecting us," he whispered. "Mom always said he was a good man. I never believed her until now." We sat in silence for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Outside, the city lights blinked like watchful eyes. Finally, Derek spoke again. "Vincent gave Mom a deadline. $50,000 by Friday, or he will hurt people she cares about. That includes me. That includes you. His words pressed into me like cold metal. My father had tried to shield us, but the shield had cracked. Torres was here, real and waiting. What do we do? I asked. Derek turned to the window, the street lamps throwing pale light across his face. We could give him what he wants. Tell him you inherited the farm. Sell it, split the money. The thought made me sick, but in his voice I heard not greed but desperation. No, I said finally. We are not giving him the farm, but maybe we can make him believe there is nothing worth taking. I told Derek my idea. We would show Vincent exactly what he expected to see, a family struggling, barely holding on. We would give him a settlement, but not the real money. Margaret could take $30,000 from my father's regular savings accounts, money she had every right to. We would make Vincent believe it was everything left. And if he does not believe us, Derek asked, then we show him the bills, the mortgage, the debts. We make him see what he wants to see. I answered. Robert Mitchell, an old farmer, who gave everything to pay medical costs, who left nothing behind but scraps. Derek nodded slowly. His eyes found mine, and for the first time I saw not rivalry, but alliance. We had 3 days. 3 days to convince a dangerous man that we were empty, that my father's legacy was ashes instead of fire. 3 days to protect the truth of the farm and the fragile family my father had tried so hard to keep safe. The clock had started. The days leading up to Friday moved with a weight that pressed on every hour. Derek came by each morning with updates about Margaret. She was frightened but trying to be strong, hiding the bruises on her arm beneath long sleeves. I stayed awake at night listening to the recorder again, my father's voice reminding me that love could wear the mask of silence. We prepared the money carefully. Margaret withdrew $30,000 from the savings account my father had left openly in her name. She placed it in a plain envelope, her hands trembling as she sealed it. Derek and I sat with her at the kitchen table, spreading bills and documents across the wood. I pointed to the mortgage statements, the hospital receipts, the thin balance of her personal account. These, I said, are our shield. Torres will see what he expects. Margaret looked at me with eyes that were tired but clear. Michelle, she whispered, I used to think your father kept you away because he was ashamed of you. Now I see he was ashamed of himself for not telling you the truth. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For the first time, I let her touch his stay. On Friday evening, we drove to a roadside diner outside of town. The neon sign flickered, buzzing against the dusk. I carried the envelope in my bag, the weight of it far heavier than the money itself. Margaret walked between Derek and me, her steps unsteady but determined. Vincent Torres was already there. He sat in a corner booth, tall and broad, his shirt stretched over thick arms. His eyes were sharp and cold, scanning the room like a predator measuring distances. When he saw us, a thin smile crossed his face. So this is the family, he said, his voice low and rough. We slid into the booth opposite him. Margaret's hand shook as she gripped her coffee cup. The bruise on her arm was visible despite the makeup. Torres leaned forward, elbows on the table. So you are the daughter, he said to me. Robert never mentioned having one. I kept my expression flat, my voice steady. Robert and I were not close, I said, especially after he married Margaret. I told him she would drain him with her debts. I was right. Torres studied me for a long moment, then laughed softly. Bitter little girl. Fitting. Margaret opened her purse and placed the envelope on the table. This is what I promised Vincent. $30,000. It is everything we can gather. Torres pulled the envelope closer, opened it, and counted slowly. His fingers were thick but quick. When he finished, he leaned back. So this is it. The great Robert Mitchell reduced to scraps. I forced a bitter laugh. What did I get as his only child? A rusty toolbox. I shrugged as if the joke was on me. Torres's eyes narrowed. He tapped the envelope on the table. I will take this. But do not lie to me. If I find out you are hiding more, I will come back. He stood and walked out, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind him. The sound lingered in the air like a warning. We sat frozen for a long time. Margaret's breath came in shallow bursts. Derek reached for her hand, his face pale. He is not gone, Derek whispered. Not yet. And he was right. For 2 weeks, Vincent lingered in town. He checked into a motel near the highway. He drove past Margaret's house, appeared at Derek's workplace, asked questions. Every move was a test, a probe for weakness. I kept to my small apartment, continued working at the hardware store, living the role of the bitter daughter with nothing. The farm papers stayed hidden, locked away, waiting for the day I could claim them openly. The tension gnawed at us. Each time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be bad news. Each time Margaret left the house, I feared she would not return safely. Derek called nightly, his voice low, reporting sightings of Torres's truck circling the neighborhood. It was not fear alone that kept me awake. It was anger, slow and heavy, rising, like storm water. My father had carried this burden for years, and now it had fallen to me. I whispered to myself in the dark, "You wanted me safe, Dad, but now I have to finish what you started." One evening, Derek called, his voice taut. "I followed him today," he said. "He went to Mrs. Garcia's, the neighbor. He asked her about Dad's finances." I held my breath, and she told him exactly what we needed her to. That Dad sold the farm years ago to pay bills, that there was nothing left. Relief swept through me, so sharp it felt like pain. Derek's voice steadied. "After that, he packed his truck. He is gone." I leaned against the wall of my apartment and let the weight of 2 weeks fall from my shoulders. Torres was gone for now, but the truth of the farm remained waiting, and so did the choice of what to do with it. The morning after Derek's call, I drove out of town before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. The air smelled like wet earth, sharp and clean after the storm. Every mile felt like a step back into a life I had left behind. The road narrowed as fields stretched wide, fences leaning with age. When I crested the final hill I saw at the farm, it was more alive than I remembered. New fences stood straight against the wind. Fields rolled green and golden, healthier than they had been even in my father's prime. The old farmhouse wore a fresh coat of paint, its porch rebuilt, windows gleaming in the morning light. I parked by the gate and sat for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, afraid to believe it was truly mine. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was in her 40s, dark hair pulled into a braid, her boots muddy from morning chores. She waved and came down the steps with the easy stride of someone who belonged there. "You must be Michelle," she said, her voice warm, steady. "I'm Sarah Chen. Your father made me promise to look after this place until you came." My throat tightened. "He really thought I would." "He was certain," Sarah replied. "He said you'd come when the time was right." She studied my face with kind eyes. "I've been waiting for you." She showed me around the farm. The barns had been repaired, the equipment upgraded. There was an office with neatly organized files, reports from Green Valley Management, proof of years of careful work. The trust my father had set up had not just preserved the farm, it had made it thrive. As we walked the fields, I felt something stir in me that had been quiet for years. The rhythm of the land, the smell of soil and hay, the distant low of cattle. It was as though the earth itself remembered me. I touched the rough wood of a fence post, and for the first time since his death, I felt my father close. That evening, I sat on the porch with Sarah. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in red and gold. "Your father was complicated," she said, "but he loved this land, and he loved you, Michelle. Every decision he made was about keeping this safe for you." I nodded, clutching the recorder in my lap. I had listened to his voice so many times it had become part of me. But here on the farm it sounded different in my memory. Stronger. Rooted. Over the next weeks I split my time between the farm and the town. Margaret paid off her debts with what remained of the open accounts. Derek began taking classes at the community college studying agriculture. He came to the farm on weekends, eager to learn. At first I bristled at his presence, remembering the smug look he had worn at the will reading. But as he worked mending fences, mucking stalls, sweating under the sun, I began to see him differently. One evening, as we repaired a section of fence together, Derek wiped sweat from his brow. "I never thanked you," he said, "for telling me the truth, for letting me be part of it. You could have shut me out." I paused, hammer in hand. Dad's plan wasn't just about me. He was trying to protect all of us. Maybe it's time we finally believe that. Derek nodded, his face set with something like resolve. Yet even as the farm grew back into my life, shadows lingered. I searched Vincent Torres's name online late at night. He had left town, but his record was a litany of threats and small crimes. Florida, then Texas, then back again. The man had a way of surviving off other people's fear. Each time I clicked through an article, my father's warning returned. If you're not careful, you might need to protect yourself from him too. The farm was flourishing, but peace felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. I had inherited more than land. I had inherited a secret war, one my father had fought in silence. Now it was mine to carry. The farm settled into a rhythm that was both new and achingly familiar. Mornings began with the crow of roosters, the smell of damp hay, the sun rising slow over wide fields. Sarah handled the accounts and crop schedules with a precision that showed years of trust. Derek came most weekends, eager though clumsy, his hands blistered from work he had never known before. Margaret visited on Sundays carrying casseroles and quiet stories about my father, filling spaces I had thought would remain empty forever. Yet the nights were restless. I could not forget Torres. Sometimes I swore I heard a truck on the road past the gate, headlights cutting the dark before vanishing. Other times I would wake with my father's words echoing in my head. You may need to protect yourself. The farm was beautiful, alive, but danger pressed at its edges like storm clouds hidden beyond the hills. One Saturday, while sorting old papers in the office, I found a second envelope my father had left with Sarah. She handed it to me without comment, her expression grave. Inside was another letter written in the same careful hand as the first. Michelle, it began. If you are reading this, the farm is safe for now. But safety does not last if you forget the threats that live beyond the fence. Vincent Torres will not stop chasing money. He will look for easy ways, and if he learns about you, he may return. Trust no promises from him and do not fight alone. The letter ended with a line that chilled me. I hid more than land for you. I hid names. No explanation, no list, just those words. That night I told Derek. He frowned his jaw tight. He means Torres's people, Derek said. The men my father used to run with. He had friends who owed him favors and others who wanted his debts repaid. If Robert had a list, it could be dangerous. Or it could save us, I said quietly. Derek looked at me, then away, the firelight flickering across his face. We need to be ready. If Torres comes back this time, he'll want more than money. The next week proved him right. Margaret called me late one evening, her voice trembling. He's here, Michelle. Vincent's back. He was waiting outside the grocery store. He didn't touch me this time, but he said he knows you're living at the farm. My heart thudded so hard I had to sit down. The quiet days, the sense of reprieve. It had all been a pause, not an ending. Torres had learned enough to find me. I looked at the red toolbox sitting on the counter. Inside it lay the recorder, the first key to everything, and beside it, the brass key to the bank that had changed my life. The toolbox had given me the farm. Now it would have to give me the strength to defend it. I called Derek. We can't hide anymore, I told him. If Torres wants to come for us, he'll find a family ready to fight. There was a silence then, his voice steady. Then we fight together. The night stretched long after I hung up. The farm hushed in waiting. The wolves of the wild were gone, but another kind of predator circled close. I stood at the window looking across the moonlit fields and promised myself I would not let fear take what my father had bled to protect. The story was no longer about inheritance. It was about survival. The first sign came 2 nights later. Sarah found the west gate broken, the lock snapped clean. Hoof prints cut deep into the mud where cattle had bolted, and tire tracks scarred the grass by the fence line. Someone had spooked the herd, maybe stolen one, though it was hard to tell in the chaos. Derek and I spent the morning rounding the cattle, the animals skittish and restless, their eyes rolling white. It felt less like theft and more like a message. That evening, I sat on the porch, the recorder in my lap. I played my father's voice again, letting it roll across the twilight. Michelle, he said, if you're hearing this, then you know I could not keep you away from danger forever. But I trusted you to carry the strength of this land. His words settled heavy, a kind of armor I clung to. When headlights swept across the yard, I froze. A black truck rolled to a stop near the gate. Vincent Torres climbed out, broad and heavy, his boots crunching on gravel. Even in the dim light, I saw the hunger in his eyes, the kind of hunger that never stops once it tastes blood. Nice place, he called, his voice thick with mockery. Robert must have been richer than he let on. Shame he didn't trust family with the truth. I stepped down from the porch, heart pounding. This isn't your land. It never was. He smiled slow and sharp. That's where you're wrong. Margaret married my money, my debt, my claim. And if this farm is still standing, I figure I get a share. Derek appeared behind me carrying a flashlight and holding it steady on Torres. His jaw was tight, but his hands shook. You're not welcome here, he said. Torres laughed. Boy, I'm more welcome than you are. Your blood's mine. And hers, he jerked his chin toward me. She's just a stray Robert thought he could hide. Anger surged hot in my throat. He hid me because you would have used me. You would have bled me dry like you tried with them. His smile thinned. 30,000 bought me quiet once. Next time it's triple. By the end of the month, or maybe I just take the farm and save you the trouble. He stepped closer. I could smell the smoke on his jacket, the sweat of a man who lived on threats. I wanted to back away, but I stood firm. This land is protected, I said, legally and otherwise. You try to take it, and you'll get nothing but ruin. Torres leaned in, his breath sour against my cheek. We'll see. Then he turned, climbed back into his truck, and roared off into the night gravel, spitting under his tires. When the sound faded, Derek exhaled hard. He's not bluffing. He'll be back. I nodded, clutching the recorder against my chest. Then we need to be ready. Sarah came out onto the porch, her face pale but steady. Your father warned me this might happen, she said. He left instructions, contacts, numbers, people who owed him favors. It's time you saw them. Inside her office, she handed me a leather folder. Inside were names, some scrawled in my father's hand, others typed on old yellowing paper. Ranchers, lawyers, men and women from the county who had once stood with him. Allies. The realization struck me like a flare in the dark. My father hadn't left me alone. He had left me an army if I was willing to call on it. I closed the folder with trembling hands. We're not giving Torres this land, I said. We'll fight. All of us. Outside, the fields lay silent under the stars, but the air was charged like the moment before a storm breaks. The folder of names sat heavy in my lap that night, heavier than the deed itself. Each page held a thread to the past, people my father had trusted, men and women who had once stood beside him when the land was threatened by drought, by banks, by men like Vincent Torres. I read until my eyes blurred, tracing each letter with my finger, as though contact could summon their strength into me. At dawn, I called the first number. A rancher named Bill Hanley answered with a gravel voice. When I explained who I was, there was a long pause, then a sigh. Robert always said you'd come back one day. If you're calling, it means trouble's found you. He promised to drive out that evening. By noon, I had spoken to 3 others. Some were skeptical, some wary, but all remembered my father. Each one agreed to come by within the week. It was not a militia, not yet, but it was a circle forming around the farm, a reminder that the land had always bound people together. Derek watched me with a kind of astonishment. You sound like him, he said as I hung up the phone after the 4th call. I don't want to sound like him, I answered softly. I just want to keep what he kept safe. Later that day, Torres made his move. Sarah came running from the fields, her boots slick with mud. He's back, she shouted. He's got men with him this time. My stomach dropped. I stepped onto the porch, the sight freezing me. 3 trucks rolled up the dirt road, their engines snarling. Torres stepped out first, flanked by 2 men with hard faces and arms folded across broad chests. They looked less like hired hands and more like wolves answering their alpha. Told you I'd be back, Torres called, grinning wide. And this time I don't leave empty-handed. Bill Hanley's old pickup pulled into the yard just then, dust trailing behind it. He climbed out, shotgun slung across his shoulder, his presence calm but solid. Morning, he said to Torres as if greeting a neighbor. Seems you're lost. This here's Mitchell Land. Torres' smile thinned. And who the hell are you? A friend, Bill replied simply. More trucks arrived in the next hour. Men and women stepped out, their boots crunching gravel, their eyes steady. They did not brandish weapons, though some carried them openly. They simply stood near the fences on the porch beside the barn. Not an army, but enough to change the balance of the air. Torres's men shifted uneasily. One spat on the ground, muttering. Torres glared at me, his voice rising. You think a few old friends can keep me away? Money always finds its way, and I'll find mine. I stepped down from the porch, my legs steady, though my heart rattled like tin in the wind. You had your chance. You took the money and you left. That was your exit. If you stay, it becomes war, and this land has survived worse men than you. For the first time, his grin faltered. The men behind him looked at each other, uneasy in the silence that followed. Torres spat, then climbed back into his truck. This isn't over, girl. Not by a long shot. The engines roared to life, the convoy rolling back down the road, dust curling in their wake. As the sound faded, I turned to see Bill watching me with quiet approval. Your father would have stood just like that, he said. "You've got to steal." I wanted to believe him, but as I looked across the field stretching wide under the fading sun, I knew Taurus's retreat was not surrender. It was patience. And patience in a man like him was more dangerous than anger. The farm was safe tonight. Tomorrow was another question. The night after Torres drove away, the farm was restless. The cattle shifted uneasily in their pens, lowing into the dark. Every creak of wood, every rustle of wind felt like a warning. I barely slept listening for the growl of engines returning. But dawn came quiet, the fields painted gold, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. That fragile peace broke 2 days later. Sarah burst into the kitchen, her face pale. "Fire," she gasped. "The south pastures burning." We ran outside. Smoke rose thick and black against the blue sky, flames curling through the dry grass like hungry fingers. Derek and I grabbed shovels. Bill drove the water truck, and neighbors rushed to help. We fought the blaze with everything we had, beating at sparks, dousing hot earth, shouting warnings over the roar. By sundown, the fire was out, but the pasture lay in charred ruin. The smell of smoke clung to our clothes and hair, heavy as grief. Standing at the edge of the blackened field, I knew this was no accident. Torres had made his answer. That night, we gathered in the farmhouse. Margaret sat stiffly in a chair, her eyes darting between us. Derek's hands were blistered from the shovels, his face streaked with soot. Bill leaned against the wall, silent but watchful. Sarah spread a map of the farm across the table. "He's testing us," she said. "First the gate, now the fire. Next time it'll be worse. Then we make sure there is no next time," I said. My voice sounded harder than I felt. Derek looked at me. "How he doesn't scare easy. And if he thinks we're standing in the way of his money, then we don't stand alone," I cut in. I tapped the folder of names my father had left. Dad knew this day might come. He didn't just leave me land. He left me allies. People who owe him, people who believe in what this farm means. Bill nodded slowly. "He's right. Robert called in favors before, when the banks tried to take the land. Folks remember, we began making calls. One by one, people agreed to come. Not all with weapons, not all with strength, but with presence, with loyalty. 2 days later, trucks lined the driveway. Men and women stepped onto the porch, into the yard, filling the air with a quiet determination. They were ranchers, farmers, townsfolk. Some carried rifles, others only their hands and their grit. But together they felt like a wall built from the earth itself. As the sun set, I stood on the porch and looked at them. My chest tightened with something fierce and steady. This was not just my fight, it was ours. Still, fear gnawed at me. I knew Torres. I had seen the hunger in his eyes. Men like him did not stop because of fences or fire. They stopped only when forced. That night I sat with the red toolbox on my lap. I opened it slowly, running my hands over the worn tools, the recorder, the hidden compartment that had changed my life. My father's voice played once more, filling the room. "Michelle, you'll know when it's time to stand. Don't be afraid to call this land yours." Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices carrying across the fields. I closed my eyes and listened. It felt like the land itself was answering my father's words. We were ready, or at least we had to be. The final storm broke on a Friday night. Clouds smothered the moon, leaving the fields wrapped in a heavy dark. I sat on the porch with Bill, listening to the frogs down by the creek, when the first sound reached us, a low rumble of engines on the road. More than one. Headlights soon cut through the trees, 3 trucks rolling slow, their beams sweeping across the fences. Derek came running from the barn, breath quick, eyes wide. "He's here," he said. "And he's not alone." The convoy pulled into the yard, dust swirling under the glare of their lights. Vincent Torres climbed from the lead truck, heavier than before, his shoulders squared with confidence. 4 men followed, each carrying bats, chains, lengths of pipe. They looked less like hired help and more like a pack ready to tear flesh. Torres's voice boomed across the yard. "I told you this wasn't over. 30,000 was nothing. I want the farm. I want everything Robert left behind. And tonight I take it." Neighbors stepped from the shadows. Sarah stood at my side, her braids swinging in the night air. Bill shifted his shotgun to the crook of his arm. Behind us, a line of trucks blocked the drive, ranchers and townsfolk fanning out across the yard. They were quiet, but their presence filled the dark like a tide. I stepped forward, the gravel crunching under my boots. "You won't take this land," I said. My voice shook once and then steadied. My father gave everything to keep it safe, and we will not hand it to a thief. Torres laughed harsh and cold. You think a crowd of old farmers scares me? I've broken harder men than them. He jerked his chin and his men moved spreading wide. The standoff stretched thin. Then a shot cracked the night not from us but from Torres's hand, a pistol flashing as he fired into the air. Cattle bawled in the pasture, hooves pounding. Margaret screamed from the porch, clutching the doorframe. Chaos exploded. Torres's men rushed forward, but they were met by a wall of bodies, neighbors with rifles raised, others wielding shovels, axes, whatever they had brought. The clash was loud and sudden, the yard erupting with shouts and the thud of blows. Derek grabbed a length of pipe from the barn and swung hard, blocking one of Torres's men. Bill fired a warning shot into the dirt, the blast scattering two others back. Sarah pulled me toward cover, but I broke free, my hand closing around the skinning knife I had tucked at my belt. Torres lunged at me, pistol gleaming in the porch light. This ends now, he snarled. I raised the knife, not backing away. Yes, I said, breath sharp. It does. For a heartbeat, the night held still, the fight pausing, as if the land itself drew breath. Then Torres moved fast and heavy, closing the distance between us. And I knew the choice my father had left me was no longer about land or legacy. It was about survival, about proving that what he had fought for would not fall into ruin. The farm would either stand tonight or it would burn. Torres came at me with the weight of a man who had spent his whole life taking what he wanted. His pistol swung low, angled toward my chest. I felt the cold night air on my skin sharp as glass and tightened my grip on the knife. Time slowed, the world shrinking to just his eyes, dark, hungry, certain of victory. A shout rang out. Derek barreled in from the side, pipe raised. He swung with everything he had, the metal cracking against Torres's arm. The pistol went flying, clattering into the gravel. Torres roared in rage and turned on Derek, striking him with a fist that dropped him to his knees. I lunged. The knife found flesh not deep, but enough to cut across Torres's shoulder. He staggered back, surprised more than hurt, his blood dark against his shirt. For a moment his bravado slipped, and I saw the truth, a bully stripped of his weapon, cornered by those he thought weak. The yard erupted. Neighbors pushed forward, shouting, driving Torres's men back. Bill stood firm, shotgun raised, his voice steady as stone. It's over, Vincent. You step another foot and you won't leave standing. Torres's chest heaved, his eyes wild as they flicked from me to the line of people blocking every path. He saw no fear there, only resolve. He spat into the dirt, his voice low and venomous. This isn't finished. But even he knew it was a lie. His men were faltering, their courage broken by the sight of a community that would not yield. One by one, they retreated toward the trucks, muttering curses. Torres glared at me one last time, then climbed behind the wheel. Engines roared, gravel flew, and the convoy shrank into the night until only silence remained. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking. Derek leaned against the porch rail, bruised but breathing. Margaret rushed to his side, tears streaking her face. Sarah stood beside me, her palm firm on my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. Your father would be proud. I wanted to believe her, but all I felt was exhaustion. My knees gave way and I sank to the porch, staring out at the fields stretching dark and endless under the stars. The farm was safe for now, but safety, I realized, was never permanent. It had to be guarded again and again with strength and with love. Days passed. Neighbors returned home, but their presence lingered in spirit. The farm bore scars, burned pasture, broken gates, but it still stood. And so did we. Derek healed stronger for having fought beside me. Margaret softened, no longer a figure of distance, but of kinship, sharing stories of my father, with a tenderness I had never known from her before. Sarah stayed on her steady hands and calm voice, guiding the work of rebuilding. Weeks later, I walked the fields alone at dawn. The sky was streaked with rose and gold, the land damp with dew. I carried the red toolbox with me, setting it down by the fence line. I opened it, touched the old tools, and pressed play on the recorder one last time. My father's voice filled the morning air. Michelle, you'll know when it's time to stand. I looked across the fields, the land he had fought for, the land I had defended, and whispered back, I stood, Dad, and I'm still standing. The wind moved through the grass like a sigh. For the first time, I felt not only his absence, but his presence woven into the soil, the fences, the sky. The farm was mine now, but more than that, it was ours. A legacy carried not by one name, but by all of us who had chosen to defend it. And though danger might come again, I knew one thing with a certainty that anchored me to the earth. We would never face it alone.